Okay, let's start with the basics. I clearly have a problem here. I know I've said in the past, and I maintain it, that I don't like skirmish games, and yet I seem to have an awful lot of skirmish games for someone who doesn't like skirmish games. But some of these I haven't played, many of them I don't expect to last, and this video is not about that. This video is about Bloodstone, a game, a box, that is suspiciously missing from this set of boxes because I no longer have the prototype that I once did. And so we're going to talk about Bloodstone without Bloodstone here. And there's a few other games we're going to talk about that aren't currently in the shot or here or whatnot, because they're either games that have left my collection. I do maintain that I don't like skirmish games, or alternatively, they're games that I haven't played, haven't gotten my hands on. But to begin with, this is going to be an overview and comparison of Bloodstone with other skirmish games. And honestly, there's only two really that I consider to be really a fair comparison to Bloodstone, at least in the feeling that Bloodstone gave me and the feeling those games gave me. And those two are going to be Arena the Contest and Super Fantasy Brawl are going to be the only two that I really consider comparable in the feeling and general gameplay that those games gave me. But, timestamps down below if you want to jump to any particular one. Since I got asked a whole bunch of other games, I'm gonna tackle them all. High level for some, because I haven't played many of these, but to whatever degree I can. And Bloodstone, if you don't already know, first of all, it's a game on Kickstarter, link down below, but it's a 1 to 8 player game that plays in roughly 30 to 60 minutes, and it has both cooperative and competitive gameplay. The game, I mean, we have playthroughs, I have a review, so we have all the content you potentially want on the game, but the game effectively is an arena skirmish game, again, co-op and competitive, depending on what you're playing, in which you're going to have hordes of dice being utilized along with character abilities, and then a little bit of card play. The card play is very much on the minimal side to drive initiative and occasional reactions or things like that, but the card play is definitely not the focus of Bloodstone. The focus of Bloodstone is your character and their abilities, and then rolling tons of dice and strategic maneuvering of the arena and engaging with whatever challenge you have to be playing with to deal hordes of damage to other people. Now, this is not going to be a should you back it video. I will have a should you back it video coming, but I'm kind of waiting till later in the campaign because the game is expensive. I think it will hold its value, but it is expensive, and I kind of want to see what else comes out in terms of the daily reveals. Just today, when I'm filming this, which means 2 days before you watch it, just today they announced that they're going to have an additional hero, which I thought they were locked to only 8 heroes. So already there is going to be more content. We just have to wait and see. So my should you back it video will be coming out later. As far as comparing them, let's start from the very get-go. We have Warhammer Underworlds. The Warhammer Underworlds system, I believe, starting with Shadespire, and then we have maybe Shade Vault. I don't remember all the names. The one I have in front of me is Beastgrave. I think they have like 4 of these or whatnot. I have not played any of them yet, but this is going to be a 2-player game. Not a 1 to 8 player, but a 2-player game, a 2-player system. Plays in roughly 30 minutes, so it's going to be comparable in the game time, if not the player count, and it has dice and cards unique to each faction. And this one's rated a 7.8 on Board Game Geek. I'll mention all the ratings for all of these. I've learned that apparently skirmish games are generally pretty highly rated. The lowest one we have on this list is a 7.3, and then after that it's 7.7 and up, some of these crossing 8s or whatnot. Lots of high rated games here. So in terms of Warhammer Underworlds, you're going to have a competitive only versus co-op and competitive. You're going to have 2-player only versus 1 to 8 player, and it's going to be dice and cards and whatnot. The actual gameplay, I cannot comment extensively on the feeling because I haven't played Warhammer Underworlds. Next up, we have Godtear. Godtear is going to be over here. This is going to be by Steamforged Games, and this is going to be, again, a 2-player game, and I will note, any game that theoretically could be a 2 or 4-player game, but primarily is a 2-player system, I'm going to refer to it as a 2-player game. I'm going to refer to most games on this list in what they're actually playing at, and not what they theoretically could play at. And so Godtear is going to be another 2-player game. This one's coming in a bit longer, but 1 hour to 2 hours for the game. It's going to be very much dice and character abilities. Each of the little figures on the board is going to have their own set of abilities. You're going to be rolling dice, tactical, arena, skirmish management, all that. Again, have not played this. I'm going through all the ones I haven't played first to get them out of the way. But yeah, this is going to be longer than Bloodstone in terms of the length, and it's going to be, again, competitive only, and again, 2-player only. So a little bit more limited in its scope. I'm not commenting on the ratings. This one's actually coming in at a rating of 8.3 on Board Game Geek. And when I said I'm not commenting on the ratings, I mean that I'm not comparing which game is better for games I haven't personally played, but I can bring in the rating. The rating's an 8.3, which is pretty solid. This is going to be one of Steamforged Games' highest rated games out there. Then we have GKR, I was going to say JKR, which I always want to say. GKR, Giant Killer Robots. This is another one that I haven't played. This is going to be a 1 to 4 player game, so we're opening a bit in terms of the scope of what this game can do. 60 to 120 minutes, 1 to 2 hours, and competitive only, very much dice and card based. You're going to have a whole bunch of cards for the various mechs. You're going to be rolling lots of dice, shooting each other, doing damage to whatnot. And I will say, both Warhammer Underworlds, Godtear, and GKR do have more of a focus on direct killing. Some of these games are going to have a little bit more objective focus, so I'm going to focus on, well, these three are going to be more direct killing and whatnot. And Bloodstone as well is very much about the direct kill as opposed to other objectives. So that's going to be GKR. It's going to be longer than Bloodstone in terms of the gameplay, a little bit lower in terms of the player count, but not as limiting as some of these other games, which are primarily 2-player only. So there's a little bit more flexibility in GKR. There's also a solo mode, so that's going to, again, make it a little bit more comparable to Bloodstone, but it's primarily competitive only. And like I said, dice and character abilities is going to be the game, dice and cards. Then we have Hate, which I've gotten a ton of questions on because it's always behind me on the shelf in many of my shots. I have not played Hate. I want to play Hate. It has some of the most gorgeous miniatures Command has ever put out. And Hate is going to be a 2-player primarily game. They have it listed as like 2, 4, 6, whatever. But that's because you could have multiple different campaigns going at once and then having Challenger versus Challenger. The game itself is primarily a 2 versus 2. It's going to be coming in at 1 to 2 hours for the gameplay. It's going to be items, abilities, and dice. It has this cool sleeving system where you're going to be upgrading your camp in between different games. It is a little bit more campaign-based. You could play it one shot, but theoretically as a campaign, as you upgrade stuff, drag home dead bodies, burn them and whatnot, and utilize their whatever to level up your clan, your tribes, your character abilities. It's going to have a bit of a 3D terrain going on as well if you got the 3D terrain, or else just plateaus will be indicative of the 3D terrain. But again, going to be very much dice and cards again. And again, focus more on killing each other. Then from there we get to Funkoverse. And Funkoverse, well, I think I have like 2 more before we get to the ones I've played. So Funkoverse is going to be down here. This is going to be a 2 to 4 player game. It's going to be coming in at 20 to 60 minutes. So it is in that shorter range. 2 to 4 players means, again, it's a little bit more open compared to many of the games. So far, the only ones that have opened up the field are going to be GKR and Funkoverse. The rest of them are primarily 2-player experiences. And Funkoverse is going to have a focus on items, character abilities, and dice. You're going to have lots of weapons you're going to be drafting. You have this like pre-game draft where you're going to take different characters, utilize those characters, and then try to slowly kill each other as the game progresses. It is going to be on the lighter side for most of these games. Although lighter is a relative term because some of these are lighter thematically, some of these are lighter gameplay-wise. Like, for instance, Super Fantasy Brawl is a lighter game, all things considered, although I do like that one. Then we have Aristeia, I think it's pronounced. I think it's pronounced Aristeia. Aristeia is going to be the ultimate sports show. This is a 2-player game coming in at 60 to 90 minutes, and it's going to be character abilities, card play, and dice. And this is coming in at one of the highest rated on this list, coming in at 8.5. Speaking of which, Hate is in a 7.7, GKR is a 7.7, Funkoverse is a 7. Funkoverse, I forgot to write down the rating on my little sheet of paper that's strapped to the camera there, so I got nothing on that one. And Aristeia is going to be an 8.4. And so yeah, Funkoverse, Aristeia is going to be, like I said, more 2-player. The playtime is a little bit comparable to Bloodstone, a little bit longer. The gameplay itself is going to be very much arena combat with a whole bunch of different like the walls and things you can set up, lots of tokens, lots of management, but overall a highly rated, primarily 2-player, primarily competitive experience going on with there. Then we're going to have Mythic Battles, which I no longer have, but now we start talking about the games I've played. So, Mythic Battles is going to be, again, 2-player only or 2-player primarily, 60 to 90 minutes, coming in a little bit longer than Bloodstone, the more limiting in the player count. Most skirmish games are going to be 2-player only, which makes the ones that aren't already a more unique comparison. And Mythic Battles is going to have character abilities. You're going to have all these characters you're going to draft as well, these different squads or characters or gods or heroes or whatever, and each one comes into play with its own set of abilities, and that's going to have card play and dice driving the game forward. There's going to be a little bit more of a focus on objectives in this one as you try to get certain things, and there are different scenarios you can play through. This is an 8.5 on Board Game Geek. It is the second highest rated from all these other games. I think no third highest. We have an 8.6 and a 9 coming up later. And so an 8.5 on Board Game Geek for Mythic Battles Pantheon. It is a giant game. They're going to have Mythic Battles Ragnarok coming to Kickstarter very shortly. I believe March something or other. I've mentioned the date. I just don't remember it offhand. But Mythic Battles is going to be a giant game that won for me that is not in my collection. I did not like the dice rolling and character abilities in Mythic Battles as much. It is a well-rated, well-loved game, so take my opinion with a grain of salt here, but overall, I just didn't find the combat and the way that you roll the dice and then you stack the dice on top of each other to make them larger dice. I mean, not physically stacked, but you can re-roll them and add them up. There's a whole system in play that I didn't find rewarding enough compared to the maintenance of the game. It was good. It just wasn't one that I thought was great, and I eventually moved on from that one. This is where I can start talking about the feeling of games, because now I've actually played them. In terms of the feeling of games, Mythic Battles came across as far more strategic. There is a reason I said I think only 2 games on this list are really comparable to Bloodstone: Super Fantasy Brawl and Arena of the Contest, both of which I own. And the reason for that is going to be Mythic Battles and many of these other games on this list are going to come across as more tactical experiences. More, a little bit of damage here, a little bit of damage there, move around the board, roll a few dice, do an ability here, which is, you could say that about Bloodstone too, but Bloodstone is more about just dealing hordes of damage to people. It is about having fun with the craziness of the game system, the way you can just do stuff. And if you watched my gameplay with Quacklope, where we got like 3 ults in a row, it was absolutely insane. You get 3 triples in a row, which is statistically beyond the pale. It was like 1 in 2 million chance of that happening. It was absolutely insane, like I said already. But Bloodstone is very much going to be a game that gives me that feeling of just rolling dice, activating abilities, and having fun with the chaos that ensues, and utilizing the various arena scenarios and whatnot. Mythic Battles comes across as far more tactical, which is a pro depending on what you're looking for. It just means that I don't consider them very comparable experiences. Next up, we have Unmatched. Unmatched is going to be a 2 to 4 player game, so again, a little bit longer, a little bit wider in that player count experience, not just 2 player only, 20 to 40 minutes, so it's going to come in at even shorter than Bloodstone, which for most of the games on this list is not the case. Bloodstone, you can knock out a game in 45 minutes consistently, 30 minutes if you're fast, and an hour was like our longest game that we played, and that was cooperative. And so what Unmatched is going to be card-based. This is going to be one of the first games on this list that has no dice whatsoever. It is purely card-based. It is an 8.0 on Board Game Geek, and it's a reprint or reimagined, there's a word here, but it's going to be the new remastered, I don't know, re-implemented. Re-implemented is what I'm looking for. The re-implemented Star Wars, now I'm losing all the words, Star Wars something other. There's a Star Wars game that it was re-implemented from that I can't remember the title of that game. But anyways, it's going to have all these character packs that are being released one at a time, and I really want to like Unmatched. I want to have my dinosaurs fighting off against Buffy and then having Marvel Unmatched and all these things in that system. The system looks great, but it's primarily, to me, it's evolved into walk around the board, try to close the gap between yourself and your opponent, play a bunch of cards, and whoever plays better cards faster wins. It didn't come across as a game that I wanted to delve into to learn the nuance, to learn the strategy, and I am sure there's nuance and strategy. I was talking to someone else yesterday who does like the game, and they were talking about how they're getting into the decks and learning each deck and learning the ins and outs of everything, and I don't want that. I want a game that is fun from the get-go. I want a game that gives me agency and choice and feeling from the get-go. I believe Unmatched is likely a very solid experience, but it's not one that it was a game that I was looking for. It was far more based on just, like I said, playing cards in moments that didn't feel epic, in movement that felt like it was all about just closing the gap to your opponent, and then just playing the card that was obviously right at the obviously right time. Again, I'm sure people who will like this game have a lot more depth and subtlety that they can add to the conversation. But for me, Unmatched was not a game for me, and it did not feel remotely like Bloodstone. Then we have Wildlands. Wildlands, which I wouldn't really think of as a comparable game, but like I said, I kind of tried to touch upon every single game that was touched. And Wildlands, again, will not be in the stack because Wildlands is one that I played and moved on from. Designed by Martin Wallace, who is a designer that I love, but I felt this wasn't in the wheelhouse of the games of his that I love. It's a 2 to 4 player game, 30 to 60 minutes, so it is coming in at that same play time as Bloodstone. It's a competitive game. It's very card-based. It's 7.3 on Board Game Geek. It's going to be the lowest rated from these games, except for perhaps this one, Funkoverse, which I forgot the rating of. So yeah, Wildlands is going to be a game that even with that 7.3 rating, though, it is loved by many, and the card play does feel reminiscent of Martin Wallace's designs, just not in a game that I particularly enjoy the experience. It has this aspect of popping up secretively in terms of moving around the board and then just having your characters kind of appear or whatnot. There's an interrupt system. There's a lot of strategic depth to knowing which cards to play, which cards will help you, which cards to hold on into defense. Lots of things going on in the game, but ultimately to myself, it kind of just felt like you were slowly hunting people down, playing cards and killing them, which again, I could say that in a different tone of voice and it would sound amazingly cool. But to me, Wildlands did not feel amazingly cool. It's a solid system. I would say it was on the lighter side. It didn't feel as heavily skirmish based as Unmatched or Mythic Battles, but it's a system that I just didn't learn to love before I moved on from it. Ignite, which again, I don't think is remotely comparable, but let's cover it. Ignite, I do not have here because Ignite is going to be the first game that I'm not mentioning a rating on, because there is a rating on Board Game Geek, but it's not released, so I'm not going to cover a rating from 15 people and whatnot. So Ignite is going to be a 1 to 8 player game. This is the first game on this list that is going to mimic the player count of Bloodstone, give you that variability, that range. I would not want to play Ignite 1 to 8 players, I will say that. I have played Ignite one time on TTS. It was a 4-player game, and that was great, and I'd happily play Ignite 3 players and 5 players and maybe 6 players. I will not touch Ignite as an 8-player game with a 10-foot pole. The downtime versus the game does not appeal to me at all in that sense. Ignite is a deck building experience. You're going to be literally just building a deck. Think of it like Dominion, stacks of cards around the board as you slowly but surely build out your deck. And the first half of the game is a little bit of pinging at each other and getting each other's way, and then primarily building out your deck, figuring out how to come up with the best combination from whatever is on the table. Now, Ignite will have a cooperative mode as well. It has a cooperative and solo mode. So again, it is comparable to Bloodstone in both the player count and the various player modes. In terms of the play time, it's going to come in at roughly an hour to 2 hours for the game. 40 to 160 minutes is what it says on Board Game Geek, but I think it's a long range. You're probably looking at about a 90 to 120 minute experience, maybe even shorter. I can see it coming in at an hour. So it is going to be in the same range, in the same, across the board in all these different aspects, but it's a deck building game. It's a fully deck building experience, which I just don't think of as a similar game. Now, I will say Ignite is on the lighter side in terms of doing fun things. It has those moments, now that I speak of it more, maybe it is comparable to Bloodstone. It has those fun moments of comboing things in ways that are rewarding. It's not dice-based, it's not, playing cards from a pre-stacked deck, but it does have these times where you will be able to have a turn that just cycles because your cards came up in the right order, you were able to do the right things, and you're able to deal tons of damage to people. Although tons is where it's going to differentiate, because in Ignite, a single point of damage is enough to, 3 points of damage is enough to take out a character in general. And each team has 3 characters. So 9 points of damage is the total amount of damage you can do to a player in this faction before they're out of the game in general. Versus in Bloodstone, 9 points of damage is basically a bad roll and practically a miss. So it won't have this giant amount of damage that Bloodstone does, but it does have those epic moments. It does have those fun things where it's less about the balance of the game and more about the fun of the experience. And so I guess Ignite, to some degree, I'd consider a comparable experience. By the way, Ignite, I'll throw a link down below. That one still has access to the pledge manager, so you can still actually back Ignite even as we speak. I did a video on why I backed it. You can check out that as well. Then we have Primal the Awakening. Again, a game that I shouldn't say again because Ignite I was wrong about. Primal the Awakening, a game that I do not consider comparable at all because it's not a skirmish game. I don't know why I got requests comparing it, but maybe it's just because they're both expensive games with lots of miniatures and people are wondering where they should put their money. So if that's the question, if you're wondering where you should put your money, I can tell you, speaking for myself and only for myself, Primal wins over Bloodstone any day of the week. Primal is one of my favorite games right now. One of my favorite, most anticipated games right now. That I'm really looking forward to it. But don't let that be a hit against Bloodstone. I don't consider them comparable, but I'll compare them to whatever degree I can anyways. Primal is going to be a boss battling experience that's very heavily based around the card play of the game. It's going to be a 1 to 5 player game with the expansion 1 to 5. It's going to be 60 to 120 minutes. I would say we regularly knocked out games of the Primal in around the 60-minute range. And then it's co-op. It's co-op only. So it's going to be the first game on this list that is cooperative only because, like I said, it's not really a skirmish game. It's going to be card based and a minimal board. There's another thing that's only here is most of these games, if not all these games, have different boards where you're fighting each other. And Primal has a board, but it's basically a circle, and you'll rotate around the circle. It has importance. Don't get me wrong. It has a lot of importance to the game, but it's certainly not the same board that you're going to see or experience in most of these other games. And so Primal is a game that, again, I wouldn't really compare it. I'm not going to talk about the rating because, again, it's not out yet. I'm sure there'll be a late pledge available for it at some point. I don't know when that's opening up. This was just recently on Kickstarter, and it's one that I'm very much looking forward to, but I don't consider it remotely comparable to Bloodstone because one's a skirmish game and one's a boss battling experience. I guess if you're arguing the cooperative mode of Bloodstone versus the cooperative mode of Primal, technically it's a boss battling experience. But the experience, the feeling is so vastly different. One is a heavily strategic card-based system where you play out card after card, build your deck, figure out the way you're going to equip your character so you can take on that dragon, lizard, elephant thingy-majiggy and kill it. And the other is just rolling tons of dice and destroying each other with more strategy than that might sound. There is strategy to be had. There are decisions to be made. If you watch the gameplay I have with Quacklope, you'll see how we lost the game. But we easily could have won had we made a few decisions differently. So there's certainly strategy, but just a very, very different feeling in the experience the games give you. One's chuck dice and have fun. The other is intensely look at your cards and occasionally remember that you're playing a 2-player game and talk to the person next to you. So very, very different there. Then we have Guards of Atlantis. We got 4 left here. Guards of Atlantis is going to be a 4 to 8 player game. Technically, you can play 2 players as well, though I don't know if I would want to. I guess you could play a 2 player. Let's call it a 2 to 8 player game, in which it's going to be 60 to 120 minutes, so 1 to 2 hours, and it's going to be a character building system with unique decks. So no dice in this one. It's all about each character. Each hero you choose comes to the table with their own unique deck that you will slowly but surely level up throughout the experience. And this is another one that I don't think of as a skirmish game, but I got requests for it, so I will talk about it. And Guards of Atlantis, I don't have it on my table because I got rid of the original Guards of Atlantis in preparation for Guards of Atlantis 2 that I absolutely 100% backed. I do not know if you can still late back it or not, so check that if you're interested in it. But it's very much a team-based experience. You can, in theory, control all your heroes yourself, which is why it could be a 2-player experience, but ultimately I would say it's probably a 4 to 8 player experience, more commonly 4 to 6. You don't really want that downtime of 8 players. It's going to take away more than it adds. But not Primal, but Guards of Atlantis, 2 games. Guards of Atlantis is very much going to be the pillar of what it is that upgrading your character, which is so much fun. Every time you upgrade your character, you're going to be choosing cards. One card is going to give you a stat boost, the other card is going to give you an ability. So you have to try to both upgrade your deck while you upgrade the stats of your character as you go through the game. And it's going to be a MOBA game, a game where you have lanes and you're trying to push the lane back and forth to ultimately win the experience. Not typically a skirmish game, but definitely going to have aspects of trying to take each other out slowly but surely, whether the heroes or the minions. There's still strategic depth to each option you choose there. I think Guards of Atlantis is an excellent game, but very different in the feeling than Primal. It's going to have a little bit of the range of the player count, so you will have that. It's not going to have cooperative and competitive, so you don't have that gap there. Different feeling to the game, but Guards of Atlantis, very much looking forward to that one. Then we have Rum and Bones, which is again going to be a MOBA game, although this one I would say does start to feel a little bit more like Primal, because Rum and Bones compared to Guards of Atlantis very much do fall into the more heavy strategy, more rolling dice and having fun, still with strategy camp. So Rum and Bones will have that a little bit. And it's one of my favorite games. It's over here. Really enjoy this one. Every single time I pull it out, it's a blast. It is harder to pull it out. This is going to be a 2-player game. You could play a team mode as well, but primarily it's going to be a 2-player experience. It's going to be 1 to 2 hours for the game, and it's going to be all about the character abilities, the card play, and the dice. It's going to have all of those. By the way, Guards of Atlantis is an 8.6, and Rum and Bones, which makes Guards of Atlantis the second highest game on this list. And then we have Rum and Bones coming in at 7.7. Although I can't choose. I did a play this, not that, and then it's still hard to choose. But Rum and Bones is going to be all about having cards from the various faction you choose, the pirate faction. And then the pirates you choose throughout the game are going to have tons of abilities, or more specifically, tons of pirates, each pirate with 3 abilities, generally speaking. And you're going to utilize those abilities you're going to level up as you kill different minions. As you kill the minions throughout the game, you're going to gather different coins and level up your pirates and use those to have better, stronger abilities, all in the pursuit of accomplishing your objectives, because you ultimately have to get the most points in the game, and most of those points are going to come through taking out your opponent's ship features and whatnot, taking out their gun, taking out their mast, taking out different parts of their ship. Yes, you can also get points through killing their opponent's characters, but that's not the driving force of the game. It's one thing I've said in general in the past. I tend to prefer skirmish games, when they are driven by something other than simply smash, 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 smash. Generally. Not always, because Bloodstone's an exception to that. So yeah, Rum and Bones. That's going to be Rum and Bones. I would say it gives me the general feeling of fun and rolling dice and doing cool things that Bloodstone does, but a longer playtime, harder to set up, harder to table, a little bit more involved, harder to teach, but definitely a rewarding experience. And then from there, we finally move to the last 2. This is a longer video than I thought, although I'm talking about a lot of games, so I shouldn't be that surprised. The last 2 are going to be the games that I think of as most comparable to Bloodstone in different ways. We're going to have Arena the Contest. Arena the Contest is going to have 1 to 8 players, similar to Bloodstone. It's going to play in 45 minutes to 120 minutes. It has a longer gap depending if you're playing it as a team-based fighting game, if you're playing it as a cooperative, and also just in general how well you know the game and how long it takes you. So it is going to be a longer game than Bloodstone in that sense. It is going to be it's going to have cooperative and competitive and cooperative. So it's going to have both modes similar to Bloodstone. So we have the player count range of Bloodstone. We have both modes similar to Bloodstone. In terms of the actual gameplay, it's going to be character abilities and rolling dice. Again, similar to Bloodstone. It's coming in at a 9.0 on Board Game Geek, the highest rated game on this list, and I do not have any disagreement with that rating. Arena the Contest is an excellent experience that I only wish I had actually played the competitive mode so I can give you more information about how that compares, because the competitive mode is team-based. In theory, you can play it, 2-player head-to-head controlling multiple heroes, but it's going to be utilizing those characters in an arena to move around and deal slap-happy amounts of damage to each other, because one of the things I love about Bloodstone, and one of the things I love about Arena the Contest, is that idea that it's not about trying to eke out 1 point of damage here, 1 point of damage here. It's boom, 17 damage to your head. Now the characters have to match that. The characters have to have 90, 100, 150 health, whatever it is, so that it actually feels like it's still a back and forth. But that idea of being able to do sweeping amounts of damage to each other with your abilities, and lining up the combinations of them of, I'm going to push you into the lava here, and then I'm going to do some damage there, and additional damage because you're in the lava is going to have healing. The abilities and the classes and the interplay. I think Arena of the Contest is going to give you a better team experience than Bloodstone. It's going to have more cohesive abilities working together, more of a feeling of different characters helping each other out rather than just different ways of doing damage. So you will have that. And part of that's going to be because Arena of the Contest is a team-based experience versus Bloodstone is primarily not. The general arena mode of Bloodstone is going to be 1 to 8 players going at each other with just damage. Straight up damage. You can't be a healer when you're a team of 1. Now, the cooperative mode in Bloodstone is going to be different, but they didn't build new characters, they just slightly tweaked abilities. So Arena of the Contest is definitely going to give you more of an idea of team cohesion. Bloodstone is going to be more accessible and easier to get to the table, both in terms of explaining it. There's far less edge cases, far less things you have to be aware of, far less movement or whatever it is. Bloodstone is easier to get to the table, it's easier to play, it's faster to play. I think Arena of the Contest is more rewarding though. So if you're looking for something a little deeper in terms of what the experience potentially gives you, I think Arena of the Contest is the right choice there. If you're looking for something that's just more slap happy fun, easier to get to the table and easier to play, Bloodstone will win there. They do give me different experiences, but they very much both give me that aspect of just being able to utilize a hero, roll some dice and have some fun. They both have D20. The idea of having a D20 game where you can just have such a huge range on it is so antithetical to what I look for in a game, and yet both of them are solid games that I'm really enjoying. And so that's going to be Arena of the Contest versus Bloodstone. Arena of the Contest, by the way, I think is also available to late pledge if you want to check that out. Then finally and lastly, we're going to have Super Fantasy Brawl. Super Fantasy Brawl is going to be a 2-player experience, so we're back to that 2-player only range. We don't have the breadth of Bloodstone. It's going to be a 30 to 45 minute experience, and it's going to be competitive card play with unique character decks. Competitive only, all card play, unique character decks, coming in at an 8.3 on Board Game Geek. So this is where it gets tricky, because on a higher level idea of the various modes, the player counts, the way the game feels, then we're going to have Arena of the Contest being a closer comparison to Bloodstone. But Super Fantasy Brawl was actually the first thing that came to mind when I played Bloodstone. This one very much does have that feeling of just doing fun things. It has the feeling of having strategy as the background, but the fun part is front and center. The idea of just doing things that are fun, doing things that are cool, combining abilities. Super Fantasy Brawl wins for me in that sense. So, in terms of these 3 games, Super Fantasy Brawl, Bloodstone, and Arena of the Contest, here's the way I look at them. If you are primarily someone who is playing at 2 players and you want something competitive, I say Super Fantasy Brawl. I will pick if I'm playing 2-player Bloodstone versus 2-player Super Fantasy Brawl, I'll take Super Fantasy Brawl any day of the week. Not any day of the week's a bit of a stretch because Bloodstone does have the cooperative mode, which is another mode, but overall, if I was playing exclusively with 2 players, I would take Super Fantasy Brawl, which, by the way, has another Kickstarter coming up for that one. If I want something with a little more depth, a little bit more reward, if I want something just rich and engaging that gives me the breadth of play, the different play modes, the fun characters, abilities, all that stuff, I'll take Arena of the Contest. And again, you can late pledge this one. It's still accessible. All 3 of these games will be accessible. But if I want something that kind of merges those 2 worlds, if I want something that gives me the breadth of play of Arena of the Contest, it gives me that 1 to 8 player count so it's flexible. It gives me that cooperative and competitive mode so it's flexible. It's not going to have as much depth in terms of the actual playing of the game, but it's going to give you a lot more depth in terms of how you can play the game. It's almost going to be a cross between these 2 games. It's like someone took Arena of the Contest and took Super Fantasy Brawl and said, how can we make a single game that combines those systems? And that's going to be Bloodstone. In terms of how I rate them all, I mean, I don't know for sure. I'll need more time with Bloodstone. Also, it's a prototype. But I'll say they're all pretty solid games that if you asked me which one I had to give up and in what order, I'd have a hard time choosing. I think Super Fantasy Brawl would leave my collection first. That's just because it's the most limited in the scope of the game. The fact that you can only play at 2 players does mean that when I'm looking at them making hard decisions, I think it would leave first just because of that alone. But that's because I play with 2, 3, 4, 5 players, so it's a different story for me. But past that, I think for any of these 3, it would be a hard decision for me to choose which one I'm getting rid of and why. I hope this was helpful. They're all these games, well, I haven't played all of them. All the ones I've played that are still on the table are games that I love. And Guards of Atlantis, which I'm waiting for my 2nd edition copy to come. Yeah, that's going to be Bloodstone, Arena of the Contest, Super Fantasy Brawl,
and a whole host of other things because people asked for them, and I try to do what I can. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. Keep your eyes peeled for a Bloodstone Should You Back It video. It will be there. It may be the last week of the campaign, or I may just wait until they unlock enough stuff that I feel I can talk more confidently about the value proposition on the table. And as always, have a good one.